Whenever you're ready.
I'm going to go ahead and start. So first of all, just thank both Bodhi and Ananda Roop for organizing and inviting me to give this paper. Obviously, wish I could be there. Then my apologies then for the changed circumstances quite suddenly. So what I'm presenting here then is a chapter draft of a larger book project that I've been developing on Capital Art Studio, which I'm going to refer to as CAS hereafter. Which is a photo archive in Zanzibar, and you'll learn more about the history of the archive itself as I present the paper. So I'm very excited to present it here, so thank you, and I look forward to your comments, questions afterwards. Okay, so I'd like to open this piece with a fitting tribute, or rather ode to the bicycle, listening to the lyrics of a song entitled Bicycle Race, written in 1978 by Stone Town's most famous former resident who left the island metropolis for England during the tumultuous times of the Zanzibari Revolution of 1964, changed his name to Freddie Mercury, and became Queen. And apologies, let me, if I can get to this.
Sorry, Prof. Gupta, I think the screen is stuck on my side. I don't know if it's the same for you.
Let me share again.
Yeah. It got stuck when you started playing the song.
Let me open it up.
Yeah.
I think it was a shift between the audio, the visual audio and the visual background. Okay, let me start slideshow. Okay, correct? We're on the first image? Yeah?
Yeah, yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay, so introduction. And this is a quote from Jeff Dyer, The Ongoing Moment. I might not be a photographer, but I now see the kinds of photographs I would have liked to have taken if I were one. Stonetown's busy streets in the 1950s became a set for photographer Ranchhid, proprietor of Capital Art Studio from 1930 to 1983. I was aesthetically drawn to the numerous bicycles portrayed in these Zanzibari images, just as it appears that Oza too was drawn to them approximately 70 years earlier. The more I looked at bicycles, the more I honed in on these photographs from the larger archive and started to create taxonomies of bicycle images. I also realized that the movement implicit in bicycle photos offered an entree to the connections between the filmic and the photographic in Zanzibari popular culture during the historical period that I explored here. I'm less interested in reading for the subject of bicycles as simply a sign of Zanzibari modernity and accoutrement that projects a fantasy of advancement via technological things. Instead, I want to focus on their ability to reflect, both indexable and iconic, the materiality of daily life in Stonetown. Some bicycles carry people, others transport piles of things, while still others appear as stage props at the edges of the frame, leaning up against walls while waiting impatiently for their owners to return. Yet in all these Oza images, they are moving still to invoke my chosen title, ready to wind down another street to reach another chosen destination. What can these bicycles say about Oza's photography, including its content and form? Can these bicycles potentially speak to Zanzibar's placeness as a British protectorate between 1890 and 1963, as an Omani Sultanate from 1698 to 1964, and as a cosmopolitan Indian Ocean port city? That included the circulation of people and consumer goods during the heydays of the 1950s and what I consider its long imaginary. I want to suggest that this period was an era of picture-taking, cinema-going, and bicycle riding by a range of South Asian immigrant minority communities, which included Goans, Gujaratis, Parsis, and Sikhs, that had settled and made a life for themselves in Stonetown as proprietors of movie theaters, photography studios, tailor shops, and general stores. It is another way of reading this, quote, time of politics, and that's from Laura Fair, by way of the visual visceral material. And it's looking ahead and globally outward through a set of photographs that convey and evoke the sociality of a certain place and period. Following Achille Mbembe, I'm invested in looking at the contradictory intimacies of the imaginary realized and the real imagined in 1950 Stonetown. Okay, part one, fashioning Capital Art Studio. Capital Art Studio, hereafter CAS, is the last remaining photo studio in Stone Town, Zanzibar. Ranchhid Oza, Gujarati immigrant to Zanzibar, first opened its carved, ornate wooden doors in 1930. The studio space is still very much intact under the current proprietorship of his son Rohit, and the earlier image was of Rohit holding a photo of his father. Even as is a much faded version of its earlier incarnation. Following David Company, who writes of the entangled and defining relationship between photography and cinema, CAS has elements of the cinematic or filmic inside its hollowed walls, which include 2 large spotlights, a backdrop of heavy balustrades, and a variety of stage props, an old rocking horse, a silver-plated comb and brush, and a mirror. It is a studio in the full sense of its double meaning, a place where a photographer works and where pictures are made. It provides a setting where, quote, photographic time folds in on itself, from David Company. Interestingly, in setting up the studio space, Oza Sr., which I refer to him as, was very much influenced by his family's weekly attendance at the popular Sunday screenings of Indian and Western films at the nearby Sultana Cinema, which he himself also photographed. And that's a poor quality image of that photograph of his. These biographical details were recalled by his son Rohit, whom I interviewed in 2012, 2015, and 2018. Here, the role of cinema in shaping identities and consumer practices, including the setting up of a photo studio in Zanzibar, was an important one. Since the 1920s, film-going was a popular pastime in Stone Town. As Thomas Burgess writes, cinema provided audiences, quote, a chance to gaze outside their islands and into the towns and living rooms of foreigners. Cinema distinguished Stone Town as the place in Zanzibar closest to the outside world, where film produced audiences of a daily visual display of Western commodities, end quote. Historian Laura Fair writes about the influence of these popular films across Tanzania and Zanzibar, as providing viewers with material they could, quote, bend, blend, and refashion to speak their own dreams and desires, end quote. It was Rohit Oza who had taken over the running of the studio in 1983 upon his father's retirement, more fully after his passing in 1993. Rohit also fondly recounted for me the story of his father's bicycle and how much he relied on it to get around the narrow, windy streets of Stone Town, very much a man about town. His father was not a rich man, Rohit tells me, but he took pride in his bicycle, to which he eventually added an engine, as he couldn't yet afford a car during the decades of the 50s and 60s amidst his marriage and growing family. It was not until the 1970s that he was financially able to purchase a car, his son tells me. It was also a time when the studio had survived the Zanzibar Revolution in 1964, which saw the closure of 2 other photo studios, with CAS the only one to remain open. He by then was making a steady profit, and with Ranchhid now a father of 6. In following sections, I hone my lens onto Ranchhid's photographs of bicycles, a favorite theme it seems to me, for I have identified approximately 35 out of a total of 160 images that feature these popular vehicles of transport. Here I approach them as an organizing principle within his larger body of work, following novelist Jeff Dyer, who, interestingly, in a first attempt to grapple with the medium of photography, has written a compelling creative tome on the nature of photography entitled The Ongoing Moment, following in the footsteps of art critics such as Jean Berger and Susan Sontag, and playing with Henry Cartier-Bresson's idea of the decisive moment of photography, focusing instead on the image's power to linger on for its viewers in time and space, producing multiple aftermaths of meaning, he writes, and I quote him. Certain pictures caught my eye, just as certain things happened to catch the eye of the photographers who took them in the first place. Initially, chance played a key part in both processes. After a point, though, I began to see that a number of these photos had something in common, a hat, say. And once I became aware of this, I started to look out for pictures of hats. I wanted to take my take on photography to be arbitrary, incidental, but at some point, things necessarily coalesced under particular areas of interest. As soon as I realized I was drawn to hats, the idea of the hat became an organizing principle. No, that's why it was the subject of photographs of hats that caught the eye of Dyer. It was bicycles that caught mine. I was aesthetically drawn to the numerous bicycles portrayed in these Zanzibari images, just as it appears that Oza too had been drawn to them early on in life as both a writer and photographer. As well, following Dyer, I mentioned the possibility of reading content for coherent style. In other words, what can photographs of bicycles taken by Oza during the 50s say about his visual style, as well as Zanzibar's places in the Indian Ocean cosmopolitan world of dhows and trade, British colonial officials, Omani sultanates, and minority communities of global Goans, Gujaratis, Parsis, and Sikhs. With this last suggestion, I'm perhaps pushing Dyer's symptomatic reading further than he intended, in order to say something beyond a reading of content for form, but also to say something about space, location, and time. I also adopt a method of seeing Oza's photographs of bicycles through a lens of tactile looking, following Margaret Olin, and sonic frequency, following Tina Campt. Both authors suggest a form of reading images that is affective, sensory, sensorial, and auditory. This kind of looking is also very much in line with my interest in reading the cinematic and the photographic that I expressed earlier as full of movement and mobility, as saying something beyond the material photograph about Zanzibar during the 50s. Some bicycles carry people, others transport goods, while others still appear as stage props at the edges of the frame, leaning up against walls, while waiting impatiently for their owners to return. Here, a gesture to the naming of my chapter, Moving Still, which is a play on the title of a book by Karen Beckman and Jean Ma, Still Moving, Between Cinema and Photography, which was published in 2008. I've purposely switched the ordering of the title words around so as to think about photography's borrowing from cinema and less the other way around, even as there is a much longer history to this joined relationship represented in media and film studies, and which includes Beckman and Ma, as well as companies cited earlier, as well as many others not discussed here. Several themes will emerge then. It is about showing how much cinema going and bicycle riding were part of Oza's daily life in Stonetown as the owner of a photography business. It's about bringing that influence of cinema into my reading of Oza's photographs of bicycles, focusing on the analytic power of the arrestiveness of the still image of a moving object, and finally emphasizing the ways in which bicycles convey mobility beyond the frame to say something about Zanzibar. Put another way, I'm attempting to combine the influences of cinema and photography alongside the latent capacity for movement as embodied in both the bicycle as a still object photograph and in the still photograph itself. They operate to suggest mobility. Mobility is a layered process that combines technologies of cinema, photography, and bicycles with particular Zanzibari forms of trade, exchange, migration, and identity. Okay, part 2, Bicycles Abound. And here's a quote from Stuart Hall from his autobiography, Familiar and Strange. My bicycle became the agent of my liberation, end quote. People riding bicycles. Bicycles abound in Ozer's picturesque photographs of 1950 Stonetown. I first want to zoom in on a set of images of people riding bicycles in and around Stonetown's narrow and winding streets. Out of 35 Oza images that feature bicycles, 20 of them feature Zanzibaris riding bicycles. At a most basic level, it's important to remember that bicycles are a form of human transport and mobility. Very often, these images of bicycles with people on them take center stage, very much representing a colonial urban Stonetown that it was during this time, wherein bicycles were very much consumer objects of desire, their imaging and imagining a form of seduction to both riders of bicycles and viewers of photographs. These bicycles also reflect the comings and goings of daily life in Stonetown, with its narrow streets, darkened passageways opening up into sun-filled courtyards and corners, ornately carved wooden doors and decorative building details that reflect Zanzibar's multiple island architectural influences, Portuguese, Arab, British, Indian, various styles of dress on display, including Muslim, Hindu, Parsi, and Sikh, robes, saris, turbans, and Western outfits, including dresses and shirts. And finally, the presence of photo studios, cinema halls, tailor shops, and general stores, mostly run by its minority South Asian community of Goans, Gujaratis, Parsis, and Sikhs, of which Ranchhid was a member. Okay. So a first black and white image introduces us to Capital Art Studio, and you can see the sign in the back of the image. It features 2 bicycle riders in the distance, one who is about to pass by the Capital Art Studio entrance, and a second who has just turned the corner. And again, you have to sort of look further in the back. A woman whose back faces us takes a stroll down the same street, the placard above with its Goan label of B. Pereira Ladies and Gent Dressmaker, perhaps a hint as to where she had her printed dress tailor-made to fit the curvaceous figure. A young man stands aloof to the left side, his foot extending ever so gently, giving this street scene of shutters, windows, and uniquely styled Zanzibari doors its quietude amidst a bustling Stonetown. A fashionable 1950s classic Studebaker car is parked in the middle of the street. The bicycles and car appear as fashion accessories to the equally fashionable persons in their tailored attire on this movie-like set. This print is one of my favorites from the Oza collection and serves as a reminder of his skill and grace as a photographer and the filmic qualities of his images. Three additional Oza images express the personal freedom and simple joy of bicycling. The damages on one print do not detract from the beauty of its visual presence, as a young male rider confronts Oza's camera head-on. In this image, the bicycle appears as an accessory to the equally fashionable bicycle rider in his tailored attire. A second image is of a young boy atop his bicycle. Placard for the jeweler Ranchhid de Silva and Sons is above him, and to his left side is a poster advertising an act of murder in 1948, American film noir directed by Michael Gordon. The third image is of a man atop his bicycle entering Stonetown from one of its many Arab archways built into its urban environment. It's an image of deep blacks and whites, stylish bicycle riders and pedestrians caught unaware by Oza's camera, of splendor to be found in the geometric symmetry of rounded tires and street signs offset by angular lines and columns. He and the row of bicycle riders ahead of them represent a middle-class urban Stonetown population, with bicycles very much consumer objects of practical use as a form of human transport across the wide swath of Stonetown. In my reading of all three of these images, I want to emphasize the role of film in shaping fashion trends. As Burgess notes, the visual experience of cinema added to the desire for, quote, clothing patterned after Western styles, end quote. Laura Fair notes that clothing imports were, quote, one of the most important and visually immediate, end quote, signifiers of social rank and heritage in Zanzibar, which in turn suggests the value of linking urban fashionable attire with cinema going and bicycling in Stonetown. A fifth photograph features two people squeezed on a bicycle as they cycle down Darjani Creek Road. It almost looks like the boy in the blue-colored shirt and white shorts is hitching a ride with an unknown driver, purposely left uncolored in black and white, in the form of a bicycle taxi. Is he enjoying the ride despite the lack of space or comfort on top of the bicycle? Is this a form of paid labor for the driver? The photograph is a rare one, both as it is color tinted and in the form of a postcard. Not many of them in circulation or extant in the Oza collection today. The sixth photograph details urban dwelling to show that certain parts of Stonetown were restricted to pedestrians and bicycles, cars not allowed, nor would they fit into its trademark narrow passageways that were part of Stonetown's British colonial urban planning. In this image, two turban Sikh men are caught on film walking and talking, one with his bicycle in hand as they cross from one section of the city to another. This image shows the diversity of populations through dress that made up the city life in the 1950s. I see Sikh turbans, Parsi-styled outfits, djackets, dhotis and caps, young schoolgirls, frocks and pigtails, and Western-tailored shorts, shirts, and pants. In the seventh photograph, two riders are featured next to an array of shop placards advertising a range of Indian specialty shops. I see one for H.R. Bhagat and Sons, dealers in, quote, African curios, Zanzibari view cards, antique Lamuchina earthenware, and old postage stamps, unquote. A sign that shows that Zanzibar has already invested in marketing its heritage as tourism. Additional visible placards include Grundig, a German electronic company, a local radio, electrical, and engineering services outlet, Oris and Phoenix, two Swiss watchmaking companies, an Indian merchant shop run by P.B. Punjwani and Company, and then finally Bablas, expert optical services on offer. Perhaps these bicycle photos are linked visually with business placards as a way of showing Oza's position as a commercial entrepreneur himself, as a proud owner of a photo studio that fit perfectly into Stonetown's global streetscape. In much the same way that as a bicycle rider himself, he chose to feature bicycles in so many of his photographs. All of these Oza images feature men on bicycles, which suggests that bicycling was an extremely gendered practice and one of privilege, accessible to its aspirant South Asian and Arab middle class. Here we could also think about pairing photography with bicycles historically as a form of technology developed in a colonial manner. Another aspect of these images is that of the shine of the bicycles that glint off the midday high sun, which suggests the ability of shine and sheen to say something, following the work of Krista Thompson, about Ranchhid Oza's ability to be modern, skills and aesthetic sensibility as a photographer and darkroom practitioner, working with the latest technologies under harsh sun-filled light, including the glare of the noontime sun and high contrast locations in and around the tropical island of Zanzibar. As well, these images say something about the owners of these bicycles and their consumption practices and comport the bicycle being their preferred mode of transport. Jeremy Prestol writes, quote, for all Zanzibaris, consumerism offered a technology to, quote, act in novel ways and have novel relations imposed upon them, end quote. Following Prestol, I want to suggest that bicycles as a consumer product and an integral part of Zanzibari daily life in the 1950s functions as a novel mode of belonging and sociality, alongside other forms of transport, such as the dhow and the car. Just as owning a bicycle allowed Oza diasporic newcomer himself entry into Zanzibari society, mobility in and around Stonetown, so too it functioned that way for other middle-class urban Zanzibaris, as shown in these photographs from the collection. It is also the bicycle as an object of sociality or gathering point that I'm interested in exploring in this first set of images featuring bicycles and their riders. In one last photograph I include for discussion, a group of Arab Zanzibari men, including one boy, hang out around a rider's parked bicycle in the middle of the marketplace with a large poster of the 1957 production of the film Mother India, directed by Mumbai and starring Hindi film star Nargis Dutt, featured in the background. The historical links between cinema, bicycles, dress styles, turbans, robes, dhotis, and sociality become particularly clear in this photograph. Perhaps the bicycle in 1950 Zanzibar functioned in much the same way as that of the baraza, which is a stone corner benches that you find throughout Stonetown, which I'm writing about actually, or the dhow that operated in Zanzibar during earlier times, or the car functioned in Stonetown for a more elite group of Zanzibaris, describing certain comportments and etiquettes as gathering points for sociality and belonging, for creating new ties and asserting old ones. These photographs by Oza are experience captured, to cite Susan Sontag, both his own and that of his fellow Zanzibaris, Arab and South Asian, carving out livelihoods in this thriving island hub. Okay. Bicycles carrying things. In this next section, I want to focus my lens on those photographs by Oza, which feature bicycles carrying things when they shift from a mode of human transport to that of cargo, overburdened with stuff. This is a topic that is featured less for out of the 35 images I've cataloged that include bicycles from the Oza collection. I only found 5 that show them represented this way. Nevertheless, I still want to discuss this typology photographs, where they provide a link to Zanzibar's important historical role as a port city linking East Africa with the Americas and Europe through slaves, spices, ivory, and cloth, and as a center for a thriving dhow trade, which made movement possible in the first place. I read this set of Oza images as saying something about Zanzibar's placeness as the nodal point in the world of Indian Ocean trade. Laura Fair reminds us of the 1950s, quote, a time of politics in Zanzibar, while Akbar Kashodkar describes this decade as the time of Pan-Africanism. It was also the most productive photographic period for Ranchhid Oza, according to his son Rohit, and the heyday for the dhow trade, according to. I see a direct link between the historical context and these photographs of the bicycles piled with stuff. First, bicycles compositionally, with their rounded tires, remind us of the cyclical nature of trade, of the movement of things across oceans and back in a circular fashion. Just as the dhow set off with one set of goods, it returns with another, its pace set by the monsoon winds. Second, bicycles were used in Zanzibar to carry these goods from the dhows into the interior of the island. It was the easiest and most inexpensive way to move stuff. Third, bicycles remind us of the labor movement of things, that is, the work involved in the ways in which people were employed throughout Africa more generally. And this is here Abdul Malik Simone has written about this. I see an image of a person holding his bicycle with one hand as he assists with his other hand to push an overburdened cart through the streets of Zanzibar. I look at 2 additional photographs of bicycles stationed near dhows with woven baskets perched on top, ready to be serviced in the transport of smaller sized goods from the port to the hinterland for local consumption. I imagine other bicycle images not featured here, burdened with things and the hidden faces of the labor drivers, including the transformation of bicycle seats into storage bins and unwieldy carriers on wheels. These piled up bicycles also serve as a reminder of the ways in which port cities function as sites of human labor and long-distance trade. As well, these images speak to Oza's visual style and aesthetics when drawn to imaging and imagining Zanzibar's centrality as a mover of people and things, including his own arrival 25 years earlier via a dhow from Gupta to Stonetown, and the period of the 50s, which included the creative domestication of the bicycle and the service of movement, not only of people, but also of goods and ideas to and fro from hinterland to ocean, here to elsewhere. Interestingly, the faint circular embossing, and here I want to just show you one where it's most obvious. You can see the embossing. Here I want to suggest the compositional work it does. The faint circular embossing of the cast stamp is visible in all of these bicycle prints. Here I want to suggest the compositional work it does, its circularity, echoing that of the bicycle tires and other rounded objects that make an appearance alongside and inside the photograph, such as the street sign, the dhow, or the car tire. These multiple signifiers of circularity work together as a gentle reminder of the worldliness, the globality of Zanzibar, as materially embossed in the cast stamp. The same embossing machine that Ranchhid used to mark each and every print of his still holds pride of place in the studio itself. Today on a shelf in the front room, as shown to me by Rohit during a visit to the studio in 2015. Okay, this last section, waiting bicycles. David Company writes, quote, moving images transform the nature of the photographic image, turning its stillness into arrestedness, where cinema exploited movement, photography could exploit stillness, end quote. Here it is interesting to think once again about the twined relationship between cinema and photography, such that the traits of one are used to exploit the power of the other genre. His writings also prompt us to think about how moving objects of transport, such as bicycles, become still photographed images and the power of their arrestedness. In this next section, I'm interested in looking at those Oza photographs that feature waiting bicycles. That is, those bicycles not in the service of people or things. Instead, I want to read these bicycles as having agency, as having a textured and sensorial look and feel similar to his other images of riding bicycles and carrying bicycles. Waiting bicycles are exclusively featured in approximately 10 images out of the 35 that are cataloged from the CAS archive. As well, they overlap in many Oza images of riding bicycles, which is less my focus here. So this last set of photographs reflect the etiquettes of bicycles in the service of their owners. These waiting bicycles are typically located at the edges of the frame, at the sides ends of the streets, as barriers between interiors and exteriors, light and dark. I feel compelled to see these bicycles standing in for their owners and riders as they carry out their daily routines in and around Stone Town. In other words, I'm interested in personifying them, for it is the way they are compositionally set up by Oza, the main feature, that lends to this kind of creative reading. In one image, a lone bicycle appears impatient for her owner's return, uncomfortable and overheated by the fact of waiting under a patch of sunlight under the placard of proprietor Isidore Diaz's general store. Two young Muslim girls whose black robes gently sway as they walk arm in arm down the street suggest a rhythmic flow inside the image. Other bicycles seem less bored, less ready to leave their signed places in the company they share. A second image features a pair of them languidly leaning against a wall, enjoying the moment together in the cooling shade under a placard for SR Falero's high-class tailoring and outfitting shop that conveniently protects their metal frames from the glare and glint of a harsh tropical midday sun. A young Zanzibari boy plays in the foreground, and a sari-clad mother with their children appear in the background as they make their way up the busy passageway. A third image casts a beautiful light onto a narrow street, showcasing Metropole Hotel and Bar, run by P.C. Costa, a going businessman. There is a boy leaning in the foreground, which perfectly balances the waiting bicycle. My colleague on this project, Meg Samuelson, has noted that many of Ranchhid's Oza street scenes are shot at or around noon, maximizing the minimal available light and narrow, darkened passageways, while also revealing, quote, a human-oriented architecture that has taken shape in dialogue with its environment, proffering patches of shade, shady respite to its inhabitants, end quote. In my inventive reading of these images, those inhabitants become the bicycles themselves and stand in for their owners, whom we guess are busy inside much cooler shops, perhaps getting a fitting done for a newly tailored outfit or buying a basic good in a general store. In these photographs of waiting bicycles, the circularity of the bicycle tires offsets the hard lines of buildings, thus softening these images and creating a compositional balance between squares and lights, squares and circles, light and dark, and portraying, quote, an elegance of geometry with a poetics of subject matter following Cartier-Bresson. And here Meg Samuelson writes, quote, his, Oza's lens, was particularly attentive to the architectural layers composing the surfaces over which this light played. He presented an assured non-Western urban modernity and cosmopolitanism. Opening its aperture to the light streaming or filtering between buildings, this camera produced clean lines, a sense of hustling activity and functionality, rather than the claustrophobia and chaos apprehended by British administrators throughout the first half of the 20th century. I leave the reader with the last image of a lone leaning bicycle parked to the left side of a row of diversely dressed Zanzibari banana and potato buyers and sellers in a bustling Stone Town marketplace. The rhythmic and light-filled compositional beauty of rounded bananas, potatoes, baskets, and bicycles in this photograph is not lost on the viewer. It is a sense of well-being of daily urban life as it was in Stone Town during the 50s, both imaged and imagined, with its moment of busyness and business that these waiting bicycles represent. Okay, and then conclusion. Here's one last OZA image that I have in mind. This photograph in particular marks a location and the passage of time. It features a lone bicycle rider moving off into the distance underneath the clock that is compositionally in the center of the image. The charm circularity of clock and tire drawing you to both objects at the same time. It reminds us that clocks in Zanzibar were very much domesticated for local use and that they were set to Zanzibari time, not Western time, following Jeremy Prestol's work. Can we perhaps say the same for bicycles imported to Zanzibar and how they were domesticated for multiple purposes beyond being a mode of human transport, taking on a variety of styles, gestures, and uses in front of the discerning camera lens of Ranchhid ozone? Bicycles are moving still, to return to my title, and suggest an approach to photography that very much reflects Ranchhid Ozo's own cosmopolitan status as a Zanzibari resident, business owner, and proud bicycle owner, writer, photographer, and cinema goer. Bicycles as content coherent to a certain Ozo photographic style. Excuse me. Bicycles as vehicles of expression and personal freedom, as signifiers of consumer goods and fashionable attire, of juxtaposition of business placards with bicycles to showcase belonging and citizenry, including his own, amongst a minority South Asian community, including Goans, Gujaratis, Sikhs, and Parsis, who operate a range of commercial enterprises, including tailoring, cinemas, photography studios, general stores, and specialty shops in Colonial's downtown. Of bicycles as gathering points for Arab and Indian sociality and showing ranks of gender and social class. Of bicycles put to labored use, carrying people and things via trade and movement from this Indian Ocean port to the hinterland, and as stage props for photography sets. And finally, as personified objects standing in for their mostly male owners. Images of bicycles also reflect a certain compositional design that inserts elements of filmic, like the photographic, of high contrast lights and darks, of soft and hard lines and edges, of circularity and squareness, and of the shine and sheen of metallic bicycle frames, all in the service of saying something more about 1950s Stone Town. In other words, Oza had a capacity to use these vehicles of transport to move viewers beyond his photographic fame, to situate Zanzibar's cosmopolitanism, specifically its taut connections between bicycles, businesses, cinema, and photography, as very much part of its sense of placeness and worldliness in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Gupta. We have, sorry, I hope I'm audible. Sorry, I forgot to I read the bio note which we have for speakers, but I'm sure a lot of us know Professor Gupta, but she's of course a full professor at WISER, and her recent publications are, apart from numerous journal articles, she's of course edited Navigating Across the Water, Navigating Indian Ocean with Isabel Hofmeyr and Michael Pearson. Her two single-authored monographs are The Relic State, St. Francis Xavier and Politics of Ritual in Portuguese India, which is published by Manchester University Press in 2014. And the second one is The Portuguese Decolonization in the Indian Ocean World, History and Ethnography, published by Bloomsbury in 2019. She has a forthcoming monograph this year, which sounds a lot of fun. It's going to be published by Cambridge University Press under the Elements in Critical Heritage Studies series, and the book is titled Heritage and Design: 10 Portraits from Goa. Thank you, Professor Gupta, for sharing your work and inaugurating this year's seminar series for us. We have a good 20 minutes or so, and now the floor is open to questions and comments. So usually just you can use the thumb tool, or you can just switch on your video and ask the question, whatever is convenient. The floor is open to questions and comments. Thanks. So,
I can
yeah.
The question. So this is, I have a few points to clarify. One is that Meg Samuelson, who was formerly based at UCT, who's now in Australia at the University of Adelaide. We've done the research together for this project. So we've gone together on these 3 visits in 2012, 2015, and 2018. And we have a visual archive that we've put together. and we work off the same archive. We're writing our own pieces, and we're hoping for an eventual joint publication as well. We've done some little pieces together. So we have our single authored projects and a shared project, and it's been a wonderful collaborative experience. It's been a little harder, obviously, since she's now in Australia, but we managed those 3 visits very nicely, and we've gotten permission from Rohit, the son, for 450 images. And so that's been part of the project.
Prof Gupta, your voice is very faint. I think some of I think there is a yes. I think if you could increase the volume a little bit.
My
Is
volume
it?
is way up.
I don't know, but then what's the problem? I mean, Shamil, Carolyn, can you because I'm using the earphone, so it's right for me. I can hear you, but I don't know if Carolyn and Shamil they couldn't hear you properly. I think.
Earphones.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. Let me see if that will improve. Okay.
It's still faint for us, or for me.
Were you able to hear the presentation?
A little patchy, Pamila, I'm afraid. But I turned up my volume as high as I could.
Yeah, mine's turned up. I'm getting my earphones right now.
Yeah, maybe if you have a set of earphones, that's just because it happens in my computer audio doesn't work at all without earphones. Okay. Yeah. Yes, Shamil, you have a question. So why don't you?
Is
Why
that
don't
any
you?
better?
It's better. It's better. I mean, it's better for me on my side. I don't know if it's better for Carolyn and Shamil.
Sorry, I don't know. I can't. I didn't hear much. So I mean, I could ask you to repeat your talk, but but I enjoyed the photographs, and I heard a bit about the bicycles. So I don't know if your project is about the photography and not about the bicycles.
Yes, it's one chapter is on the bicycles, but it's about the archive, the visual archive of the studio.
Yeah, sorry, because I was just wondering about cycling. The other part would be recycling. I mean, who fixes the bicycles?
Yeah.
What's the economy?
Great question.
And the craft economy. I mean, you know, those bicycles all look new in the photographs for obvious reasons. They were on the stage and so on. But there must be a lot that's just, you know, getting. Can you say something about this? So, you know.
Yeah. What's interesting is that I would probably have to look at what's happening today as a way to get a sense of what was happening historically. I could ask Rohit for the questions around this idea of the recycling, but I do see, even from my experience of walking around Stone Town today, there's a lot of bicycle repair shops. So obviously that fixing, patching, repairing, the idea of repair and the small things that you can repair as opposed to buying a whole new bicycle is a great point to bring into the paper. And Rohit would have some of those stories probably of his father.
And may I just continue on the bicycle?
Yes, please. Yes, please, Shamil.
So,
yeah.
I mean, in African literature, of course, the iconic scene of the bicycle is from Achebe, where the colonial official comes into the village and the people are totally frightened by what's happening here. So the introduction of the bicycle goes with colonial administration and the post office.
Okay.
So, I mean, Stone Town may be too small for your postal service. You know, you can just be on foot, but it may have a connection to this.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really wonderful point. Yeah, I think what's interesting is I actually have a chapter on crowds and British colonial officials that I'm developing on the idea of a crowd. And
I haven't picked that up in any of Gurna's novels, the bicycle, because it's set in that part of coastal East Africa.
Yeah. But what I was going to say is that most of the colonial officials are in formation and lined up. So I haven't really seen any images of colonial officials on top of bicycles, but it's something I'll go back to look at, which is interesting. Yeah, and Gurna's readings, I quite closely use them for a lot of aspects, but not in this particular chapter on bicycles.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry.
Thanks, Shamil. Carolyn, please go ahead. Yes.
Thanks, Pamila. That was kind of fascinating. So the question, I don't know whether my question lands properly, but make the best of it that you can. The thing that it prompts for me is the question of, well, who's cycling where and why? You know, what are the routes and the need for the bicycle? So you in part your presentation gave us one very concrete illustration, which was transporting the stuff from the port inland, right?
Right.
But I suddenly, as you've sort of got me to think about the bicycle, I started immediately, it prompted me to think, well, what are these internal daily circulations that the bicycle is facilitating? And I'm just imagining, even out of the studio itself, who's going where on each day and why, and what's the distance involved, and it sort of somehow is the needed context for the cycles, the sort of the sense of the routing and the rhythm and the punctuality of the bicycle ride. So any responses on that? And the meanings of these smaller mobilities.
Okay, great question. Thank you, Caroline.
Yeah. Sorry, there's another question, Prof. Gupta. Do you want to take two of them together? Alirio, please go ahead.
Thanks, Anand. And thank you, Pamila, for such a wonderful presentation. I also work on Zanzibari photographs, generally in the form of postcards. So I have a kind of two-part question. One is, I'm really curious how CAS fits in the dynamic of these other photo studios that are publishing kind of different kinds of photographs, with different audiences in mind, different attitudes towards what ordinary Zanzibari life means, and the extent to which it's worthy of capture. And in that regard, I guess it's linked. I'm interested in how the bicycle as an aesthetic object becomes interesting in these photographs. Why does it recurs because of its ordinarity, yes, but it also carries an aesthetic signal. Why take the photograph of this scene at this moment instead of at another? Very poorly posed questions, but I think you can do something with them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Should I
yes,
take those
yes.
two? Okay,
Yes,
so
yes, please.
great. Thank you for both those. So Caroline, yeah, I mean, my sense is that, okay, so I guess I should give the context of, I don't know the exact square kilometers of Stonetown, but it's quite massive in terms of getting from one spot to another. And a lot of the passageways don't necessarily link up, and it's quite a grid system. So a bicycle will actually get you somewhere much faster than walking through these narrow passageways. As well, they're quite crowded, and the bicycle kind of gives you entree in a way that walking doesn't. So, and again, you saw from the one image of the two Sikh men carrying their bicycles, there's a lot of restrictions in terms of where you can access. So bicycles became ways to create shortcuts, to go through, do your daily routines. You have to remember it's quite hot. It's a tropical island. And again, it's very gendered. It's men who are going around, running their businesses, running in and out of a shop. I mean, you can see they're not locked, right? So it's a safe environment. They prop their bicycle up, quickly go and get something, come back out. Obviously the women are most likely probably walking, and you see the women walking. And so it's a fashionable accessory in some ways. It's a way to say you're of a certain class, you've done well, and that's what I was interested in reading, was sort of, as I looked at him more and more, it was Oza's own positionality that he was kind of reaffirming through these photographs. And I was really quite excited when I kind of started to see that. And so I guess I left out some of that other context. And I think Bodhi had mentioned David Arnold's work on bicycles, which is amazing. And that's a whole nother layer that I need to bring in terms of the actual history of the bicycle and its import into the British colonies, because it's incredibly important. But again, he's about the only one writing on that. I mean, there's general histories of bicycles, but David Arnold's the only one really writing in that specific British colonial imperial context, which I think there's so much more work to be done in these, examples, including South Africa. And I think Chinua Achebe is a great example of what that bicycle signifies, both in terms of the,
the power of the colonial official, and also then the way in which Zanzibaris are using it, sort of turning it on its head and using it for this sort of middle class sensibility. Okay, so thank you for that. And what was your question around the smaller mobilities? Just the ways in which the sort of more smaller movements within Stonetown? Is that what your question was, Caroline?
I suppose I was really wondering to what extent, once one starts to think of a bicycle, what a bicycle enables from a particular place, and imagining where those particular people want to go. I wondered whether that's a worthwhile
yeah, I think it is
to follow.
Yeah, because I would assume that people would use bicycles also to get out of Stonetown, you know, to go visit family outside of the main town, to access the beach, perhaps, you know, for a family picnic, or, you know, all those kinds of things that they could do. But again, that's research that I guess I would need to do more of and ask Rohit specifically about his father. I know from his words that he would describe his father just using it to stay in Stonetown and to sort of move around within the confines of that. But I think it's a worthwhile question for sure.
And just, if I may, Nandarup, just to add one further thing, as you were you kept drawing our attention to the circle, the word circulation, you know, really started to resonate for me. And I thought, you know, there's something about the circulatory rhythms that this enables, and how that related to daily rhythm. And so on. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Thanks, Anandarup. Thanks, Pamila.
Thanks, Caroline.
Thanks, Caroline. That's a wonderful last point. And I think I'm intuiting that, but I haven't said that. So I think that's really important, the daily and the circularity, and those routes, which are probably quite patterned by the bicycle itself. Okay. Okay, so thank you, Bodhi, for coming, and I hope your teaching goes well. So, Illyria, thank you for that wonderful two-part question. So actually, I'm glad you brought this up because it brings in the other context I was starting to say before we move to the questions. So one is, so CAS is a particular studio, one, because it's the only one that survived the revolution. So there's a whole history of Goan photography studios. I don't know if you know Aaron Haney's work. I'm sure you know Aaron Haney's work. He sort of contextualized a lot of the photo studios in Africa. But in Zanzibar, I've been doing research on the early Goan photo studios because I started researching Zanzibar, not realizing there was this whole history of Goan photographers. So there's actually an amazing collection at Northwestern University, Winterton. I don't know if you know it, but there's an incredible collection there. So I've been writing a piece, another chapter of the book is on these Goan photo studios and sort of the idea of fathers and sons and tailors and photographers. And I started seeing there's a work of Liam Buckley that talks about the relationality between scissors and cameras. And so I'm kind of interested in where that goes in terms of this earlier generation. So there's names like Pereira, Coutinho brothers, Gomez. And so Ranchhid Oza trained with Gomez. He was his sort of, his apprenticeship for 5 years when he arrived in 25. So he apprenticed with him for 5 years and then opened his own shop. And what happened is, and they were all very successful. I mean, there was a huge clientele of you know, family portraits, you know, they each had their own sort of, you know, hobbies, to take photographs, and they were a big group of friends. I mean, they hung out together and socialized, and, you know, Rohit will go on and tell lots of stories about his father and the wonderful sort of photo group, that gang of photographers that hung out together. But with the revolution, so most of the photo studios did not survive. And because Ranchhid Oza was the official photographer for the Sultan, he was actually persecuted quite a bit. So he burned all his images, and that's in another chapter. So I didn't get into that history here, but obviously it's an important part of the story. And he managed to sort of survive and change his business. And, you know, he put up an image of Abed Karume just to show that he was politically aligned with the new government. So, but he barely survived. I mean, that was a really rough period. And Rohit talks about that as the sort of dark days. And I have a whole piece on darkness and thinking about that moment. So most of the other studio photographers, many of them were branches from other East African, like Mombasa. So they closed that one down because they were like, the politics is too much, or they just didn't survive and they left. So the last remaining is CAS, and that's what makes it a really significant photo studio. And obviously these other images are very, very different in terms of the style, in terms of the period in which they were taken, and the aesthetics and the color. And so what also makes the Oza archive difficult to access is it's very dispersed. because of the revolution. And there's quite a few collectors who took many abroad, and that's where many of the postcards still are circulating outside of Zanzibar. So it's been a tedious process of talking to Rohith to sort of identify, because he doesn't tell me what he has. He doesn't tell Meg or myself what he has. We have to ask him. And he sells off prints. So we'll be like, oh, is this your father's? And be like, oh yeah, that one was taken, and he has a photographic memory. So he'll tell us. So we've kind of been cataloging that 165 through this process. So I hope that tells you a little bit more. Yeah, I mean, I was a bicycle rider myself. You know, I love bicycles. And for me, they are very much an aesthetic object. And I was struck by the beauty of the bicycle. And I wanted to really push that reading to think about them aesthetically at the same time that they're doing this other work, right? Of talking about trade, talking about the history of Zanzibar, talking about the pure joy of riding a bicycle. You know, I mean, I started with the Freddie Mercury song on the bicycle because there's a reason for that, you know? And I want to think, I guess I want to stretch what that aesthetic could be visually, aesthetically, sensorially. So that's what I was trying to do. I haven't followed all of the chat. Are there any other questions?
I don't see anything in the chat immediately, but we have a minute or so left.
Okay.
Last round of comments, questions. If anyone wants to jump in now. I had a question, but I think you've answered it because you know in already. I mean, because Ilirio's question and Carolyn's and Shamil's question, all of us, I think, were trying to see what the bicycle is doing in the photographic archive, rather than, I mean, it's in the presentation. It was vivid that within the photographic archive, it is doing a particular kind of work. But where it's moving in terms of the contextualization, that's, I think, what we the general query are coming from.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know if you don't have to respond to that. I think you have already responded to that in different ways. So for me, that's one thing which stood out, because it's doing different kinds of labor. So I was wondering what the bicycle does to the photographic archive, or is the photographic archive more central rather than the bicycle itself, and the bicycle actually comes as a particular part of the photographic archive, which then you are, foregrounding.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a tension always between what the object is that I'm choosing from the archive to talk about and the larger archive. So I kind of have chapters of one. So one is on the idea of darkness. I have another chapter. And again, it's me pulling. So I guess the larger project was taking this sort of very, Omani Sultanate colonial archive and unmooring it from those logics, those archival logics, and really playing with it. So sort of one of my first things was to play around and disrupt the typologies of, the classics. Technology, colonial officials, the Sultan, the royal family. And so I've been playing and disrupting those. So one was to take something like the bicycle. There's another chapter that's going to be on the crowd and the concept of the crowd, and reading these, because there's, I don't have that. I'm not going to go through and get the information on these photographs as historical source materials, right? Who's in the photograph? That's not possible.
Yeah.
Right. And again, these are all off prints that, Rohith gives us. And, so I'm trying to sort of inject my own way of reading the archive as to say something about visual cultures in Zanzibar. So again, another chapter is on concept of, so one's on darkness, one's on bicycles, one's on crowds. I've done one piece on sort of Baroque heritage and thinking more about Rohith, because as you can see, the emphasis right now has been on the father, on Oza Senior. And, Oza Jr., as we call him affectionately, has his own archive, right? And so there's also a shift to his images, which he's less willing to talk about, which is quite interesting. So he did a lot of images of bullfighting, so there's a lot of objects or things to, I guess I'm interested in taking these objects as ways to read the archive outside of the colonial logics. And it's a form of experimentation, but I'm enjoying it. So, and I think I'm trying to say something about Zanzibar, hopefully.
Thank you so much, Prof. Gupta. The last round of questions, I think we are already over time, but thank you for sharing your work with us. I think Caroline has a comment.
Yeah. Temple aspect, yeah.
Oh, sorry, just I was squeezing in a last.
Yeah.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. Sure.
Just a quick pointing out that circulation seems spatial, but in fact, both bicycles and photographs have an aspect in which they speed up. So it's temporal.
Yeah.
They speed up circulation. They're means of speeding up circulation. I found that quite intriguing. Sorry to come in right at the end.
No. I think
No.
that's a really great point, Caroline, because that last photo with the clock and the bicycle, I think I was trying to access that, and I haven't said it in the way that you said it. So that's really incredibly helpful. So thank you. I'm sorry about the sound. That's a real sort of disappointment.
No, it's fine. It's fine now. I think the earphones help a lot.
Okay.
I think it's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway,
Okay.
I hope.
Sorry.
Go
No. I was. Yeah, we did. And thank you for sharing your work, and hope to see you in person soon.
Yes.
And yes, thank you
Wonderful,
everyone for being there. And next week we have our Professor Lance Van Sittert, who's going to present his work. So hope to see you there next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pamila. I really enjoyed that.
Oh,
Lots
good.
to think
Great.
about. So nice
Okay,
to see your
great.
face. And
Nice to see you too.
I
Okay.
wish it was in person, but I'm
I
presuming
know.
we'll
I know.
Can I just take the opportunity of saying, have you seen the Irma Stern exhibition on at the Norval Gallery here in Cape Town?
You know what's so funny is I was going to go tomorrow to see that in Cape Town because I'm working on Irma Stern's paintings of Zanzibar and thinking about them in relation to Oza's photographs. Because I'm very interested in it. I will. It's on till July now. They've extended but I literally had my plane ticket, all set up. I was going to go today, present at UCT, and tomorrow go to the Norval Foundation. So, but thank you for bringing that up again. I can't wait to see it. I'm very, very excited.
And the thing that struck me in contrast to the photographs was the question of color. It's going to knock you, it's the color and the way that the color evokes a sense of the connectedness across the Indian Ocean is gobsmacking.
Okay.
The color the issue is just extraordinary.
Okay, wonderful. Because it's so funny that I was struck by her images and thinking about Oza's photographs, and I wanted to write something around that. So that reconfirms that my visit must take place.
So, these cycles, are they made in Zanzibar? Do you know where the cycles are?
No, they're imported, as far as I know. Yeah, they are brought in. And again, this is where the David Arnold work is important and getting the information. But it's not easy to find out particular case studies, which companies and all of that.
Which ship manifests into the Dar es Salaam and so on.
That's a great idea. Yeah, that would probably
I think they might be.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I will look into that. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely to present my work. Great questions. So much appreciated.
Bye.
Bye.